Diane Ravitch was Secretary of Education under President George Bush, and had an educational set of philosophies aligned with President George Bush, and she, which involved a whole lot of testing and some other policies that many people around here probably don't agree with. Anyway, she's changed her tune and has written a book which has recently been published, in which she has announced that she is against the very policies that she pursued when part of the Bush White House. So she's now a professor at NYU, and which is a place for all people who change their minds. And this is, we were joking before, we can now all say it, thanks to Vice President Biden. She is, and this is a big fucking deal. So that's what the Vice President said about the health care bill. That was picked up by the media because he didn't know his microphone was on. And I was saying last night I saw Whoopi Goldberg, who announced that, that she now could say fuck. And she proceeded in this large auditorium I was at to tell us that she was going to say fuck from now on because of Vice President Biden has set us free. So watch out, I might be doing the same thing. I've already done it, 5 times? When I first moved to New York, people asked me, I lived on Washington Square, and they asked me how did I like living in New York and what were people like here? And I said, well, they're all motherfuckers. Because that's what I would hear all day long, you know, coming from the park. You motherfucker, hey motherfucker, hi motherfucker. So, holy fuck. I just thought that that's the term of endearment as well as of the term of argumentation. And the fact that you could not say that word on radio or television, it's quite remarkable, isn't it? That what is probably the most common word in our environment, other than "and," is not permitted. And there you go. And that fits right in with today's class. Because today we're going to be talking about the body. And that means, yes, we're going to be at least alluding to the phenomenon of the fuck. But we're going to be talking about other aspects of the body as well. And there are a number of things that we're kind of trapped in with these bodies of ours, getting back to the whole biological issue, and that even as sociologists we have to face the fact that we are physiological phenomenon. And there are some basic things that we all do. We eat. There's a drive to do that. Mostly, some people do starve themselves for one reason or another, but again, we won't be around for long if we don't do it, so it seems to be a fundamental aspect of our being. We engage in sex. Again, not everybody does it. Abstinence and celibacy happen voluntarily and otherwise, but again, it's very common. We have the equipment, and societies would not stay around if at least some people didn't engage in it. And we also eliminate, otherwise known as shitting and peeing. And we wouldn't be able to be around if we didn't do that either. And a little footnote, we also need to sleep. And these are all parts of the buy-in that we do by coming into life and staying in life. We have to unavoidably do all those things. And the question then is, well, how do we as sociologists deal with that? And I think you already know the answer to the question, which is that people vary in how they deal with that. They vary by individual, they vary across history, and they vary by culture. And in a way, that's what we're going to be talking about today, really continuing on that discussion of how those variations occur, how this operates, that society, in effect, meets the body, what goes on. I should also tell you that sociologists have not performed all that well in these regards. It is only quite recently, I think, that sociologists have been giving really close attention to the human body in these various aspects of eating, sexing, shitting, and sleeping. And in fact, for some of those, we hardly have touched it at all. But nevertheless, there's been a start. And the great figures that I've been talking about in the class, the dead Germans of Max Weber, Karl Marx, they really didn't, the Frenchman Émile Durkheim, you won't find much about, really about all of these things. Marx famously said, men eat before they reason, but that wasn't, he wasn't interested in the actual eating. He just meant that they needed to have a livelihood and the economic needs come first. But he didn't really ask questions about the eating and didn't look at the eating. So it's relatively a new subject. However, we do have something at least to go on. And this is another person, Norbert Elias. He's no longer alive. Norbert Elias is a 20th century figure, and in fact is one of those German intellectuals, German Jews who managed to escape Germany before the Holocaust or the early stages and make his way to the United States, where he really did not have a major career. I don't remember the universities he taught at, but it's not anything important, unlike the other figures we've talked about in the class. But he did something that was to take up subjects that other people had not done. And among his books is this book called The Civilizing Process. And I'm just having a great time hitting the key. And that's something, as you know, I just love to do, is hit the key and watch it. Oh, there we go. I didn't hit it hard enough. There you go. So Elias lived right into our modern times, 1897 to 1990, and he did become famous enough to get a bust made of his head. And that's why I chose this picture, so that you'll know he made it to bust, and not everybody does. And what was Elias talking about? Well, in the civilizing process, what Elias argues is that, at least in the European context, there's been a continuous move to refine and keep adding on layers and specifying how it is that human beings should do these things with the body. That is, how do you eat? Exactly how do you eat? For example, do you eat with your hands? Is that okay? And increasingly, the answer is not. There was a time where people routinely ate with their hands in Europe, and indeed in sub-Saharan Africa, sometimes people still eat with their hands, put their hands right into the food. And that was what the European mode was as well. The development, Elias spends a lot of time talking about how it is that things like forks and spoons first evolved, and how it is that people were told precisely how to use them. And all of us growing up as children were taught all the yeses and nos about what you do, how you hold a fork, what you do with your hands when you eat. It's all given to us in great specificity. And of course, we call it manners. And of course, it has nothing to do with nutrition. It really has nothing to do with disease. It's all about following these niceties. So it's another way of showing that we are competent members of society and of a particular society, of a particular social class in a particular society. We don't use chopsticks in this country unless we're going to a chopstick-type restaurant. And then it's cool, especially places like New York, to indeed show that you can switch and be a chopstick person at the specific moment when chopstick person is what you ought to be. That's just a kind of latest evolution in these manners and niceties of how we are to behave. And he, Norbert Elias, takes us through the details of what you do with your snot and how to handle it, including literally don't. And at certain points in history, people just treated their snot as the way we treat. Look at what I can do right in front of you. Look what I'm doing. Do you know what I'm doing? I'm clearing away my human waste that happened in my ear. God, I got to get this straight. Yeah. But that brings up an interesting topic. Ear's kind of in between. Not good. Not good to go searching through your ear for earwax, and extremely not good to fetch snot. This is not good. And Elias traces through the 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th century how it is that the great philosophical figures were writing a kind of manuals of good manners, including Erasmus. I mean, the most famous thinkers of the time, telling people what it's cool and what it's not cool to do. And then, of course, urination and defecation. Like, don't do it in front of the ladies. That became an early warning to people who otherwise did it in public. But don't do it with a gender cross. For example, do it in the hallway. Don't do it in the drawing room. Do it, of course, outside. I shouldn't say of course. Everything is up for grabs over history, or an awful lot is up for grabs as to who will do exactly what and in exactly what way. Elias only, I don't think, spends that much time on sex itself. Maybe even he was afraid to go to that topic earlier in the 20th century. But you get the idea. He is saying that these ways of doing things and handling our bodies, which we take to be part of our natural being, are not natural at all and have varied tremendously over history, and how that's to be handled. I'll just, because I'm afraid I'll forget it, I'll just mention that, again, using the public restroom, the Romans, did I tell you this? The Romans, the Romans took plumbing very seriously and built very elaborate public latrines. And those public latrines had as many as 60 or 80 people sharing them at once with no partitions, no pretense of partition. And they were social encounters. So sometimes they were in like a half-moon shape in a big room, and it's often very elaborate with mosaics and artwork. And there you were in your toga, surrounded by your friends, your mates, people you knew, and you did your thing. Very, very different from the way we do it. But they were enveloped in their togas. So compared to what it would look like if we did the same thing, we would be exposing more than they were doing. So there's a specificity, again, about that way of doing human elimination compared to ours. It's not simply that, well, they're just open and free. They're open and free in some ways, not so open and free in other ways. Very precise set of manners of how you do it and what you do it with. You use a fork, you sit in a room surrounded by other people, no partitions between you, and away you go, and make a party out of it. And that's what we do that with food. We make a party out of it. Well, why not when the food comes out the other end? Why shouldn't that be a party as well? It's just an open question. And I turn it over you and the student government of NYU to try to consider. So anyway, that's what Norbert Elias was bringing our attention to. And some people in social science are taking it up. By the way, even the anthropologists who spend so much time with other peoples of the world, they always talk about the kinship system, the economic underpinning of the society, how these tribes and peoples of the world made their living, but and food. But when it came to, for example, human elimination, they tended not to say anything. And so we know less about that, and including also the archaeologists in, say, the 19th century and early 20th century, because these were taboo subjects. as they excavated, and when you excavate, you destroy. You're destroying evidence as you go. We have vacuums in our knowledge about how other people lived and what went on. So, of course, we're always interested in gender and how that works. Well, fundamental. We've been over it and over it. We, at least, and it happens in many cultures as well, have only two. We come in only two genders, male and female, and we are only boys and girls when we're born. Infants, when they're born, actually are sometimes not clearly male or female. So, for example, the sexual organs can be differently formed. And so the testicles, for example, may be, a boy infant may be born with the testicles inside. That is, quote, corrected. And other corrections are made as much as surgically possible when a baby is born. In other words, it's not plausible for a child to be treated as neither male nor female or as something in between. And the thrust of medical technology at the moment of birth is to fix, get that word, fix, what is this mistake, and make the person male or female. Later in life, when someone has a different gender that does not conform to their body, to the biological what's there, say testicles, then the desire to fix it, to make the body conform to the gender of the person, that is a bigger deal. And many people consider that to be wrong and unnatural in itself. And one of the reasons is because, I think that some people feel that way, is because there is no, there's very little opening for the idea that that sexuality and gender is fluid in a way that it will allow a person to be one thing at one moment and another thing at the next moment. It's just like you can't be two things at once, both male and femaleness, and you can't be two things at different times in your own being. You're fixed as either male or female. And that's what at least we want to believe. And our classificatory system is built on that. Well, a whole lot more happens as time goes on. And I warn you, we're going to talk a lot about sex. So this is a photo of a person who lives a life in both genders. This is Navajo, and Berdache is the term that's often used for Native American, to designate people who are both male and female in some way in their gender displays. They're anatomically males, but in their gender displays and social roles as both male and female. Now, the word Berdache, I understand, comes from, well, it sounds like it, and I think it does, a French term. And as used by the French, it has a kind of demi-monde, risque quality, a kind of prostitute or loose woman. But that is not what's meant here. And a term that's often used is the term, and some Native American groups now prefer it, a person of two spirits. That's what they say, a person of two spirits. So he is dressed as a woman and indeed performs social roles of a woman, but with a little bit of a different twist, because the Berdache were considered to have special spiritual powers, capacities that other people didn't have. So it isn't as though they were despised or stigmatized or looked down upon, which is, say, what a person who cross-dressed in 20th century America had to deal with, or that it's a performance like a drag queen in Greenwich Village. Instead, this is a specific role within the division of labor of the culture, and it's an honored role. Now, oddly enough, or ironically enough, now many Native American people don't want this to be part of their culture because they've actually been acculturated to U.S. culture, which looks down upon cross-dressing, intersexuality, transgender, and all of that. And so you have a very interesting example of where certain groups of sophisticated leaders of Native Americans, only some, and anthropologists want to use this case to, in effect, honor the Navajo tradition and create space for non-Navajo people in America. But this conflict takes place within those worlds, and that's very interesting. It's not just the Navajo, by the way, who had these types of people and this particular role. I want to show you, just to let you know that this goes back quite a ways. So this is a famous American artist, not a Native American artist at all, who painted the West. I don't know the date of this painting, but you can see he was dead in 1872. So this goes back quite a ways. And you can see the Berdache figure as the other people do a dance to the Berdache that George Catlin recorded for us to know that this is not some contemporary or near contemporary issue, but it goes back, it goes along a long ways. In this case, a magical figure in Native American culture. And across numbers of Native American cultures, I use the Navajo, but it goes much beyond the Navajo. And indeed, we find it in other parts of the world as well. So let me give you some examples of how that worked. First of all, to just say that cross-dressing and sexuality are themselves up for grabs. So it is often thought, and I say often thought because it's very hard to have really good data, that most cross-dressers in the United States, men who dress as women, at least that piece of it, as opposed to, I don't know anything about women who dress as men, but men who dress as women are heterosexual in the main. They are not homosexual. They are, it is sometimes the case they are homosexual, but they are frequently heterosexual. So whatever the numbers are, the dressing and the sexual preference are not the same thing, which again starts telling us that we have to separate those two things of sexuality and gender and sexual desire, that we don't know from looking exactly how that's going to play out. The Romans engaged in cross-dressing with some frequency, and that was indeed not thought to have been homosexual. Again, what is or is not homosexual, we'll never really know, because wherever homosexuality is not itself valued, we know there's always more than is evident and is that obvious. But it's certainly the case that cross-dressing was primarily heterosexual. So, but you do have on the scene people who are cross-dressing and men who look like women. The other way around, there's a group that are referred to as the sworn virgins of Albania. And I don't know quite exactly totally what sworn virgins means in its sexual implications, whether it means complete celibacy, which is the way it's been written about, as in the term sworn virgin, or whether this involves lesbian activity. The sworn virgins of Albania, who go back, I don't know how far, but certainly into the 19th century, were, they are said to still be around. They are anatomical women who live as men in the sense that they are head of a household, not with a husband, but with other people, for example, sisters and brothers, parents, and the children of other relatives. And they were at least the people who functioned as protectors, as physical fighters, and who made the living the primary breadwinners, as we would say, for the family. So on our great tour of how this all works, we should take that on board and take that into account. What other things should we take into account? We should take into account, famously so, and I didn't bring any images for you, but boy do they abound on the web, the specifics of Greek homosexuality. And I use the word specifics because, again, that's where the action is the word specifics. So sometimes we hear the Greeks believed in free love. The Greeks did not believe in free love. The Greeks did not believe in homosexuality. They did not believe in gayness. Instead, there were actions that we regard as homosexual between men, and that was considered a part of life. But they did not consider specific people as homosexual or not. They regarded certain actions as homosexual or not. And so at a certain stage of life, men and boys were expected to engage in homosexual activities. And it looked like this. A young post-pubescent boy was presumed to be an appropriate pupil, learner, who was under the tutelage of an older man, but with whom he had sex. But the older man was always the active partner, that is, was the inserter of the penis, as opposed to the youth who is the insertee. So it's not forbidden to engage in what we would call the homosexual act. What is forbidden is to do it at the wrong age and to do it out of role. If you're young, you are the insertee. If you are the older man, you are the inserter. And that's the way it's got to be. That's the way it's always been. That's the way it always will be. And of course, it's not. But it is the specificity that I want you to appreciate, and the fact that it was, indeed specific. I have one here. Did I bring it with me? Nah. So I'll just tell you about it. Yeah, I didn't bring it with me. I have the anthropological description of this one, which is even more amazing, which is that in Zambia, in New Guinea, an anthropologist named Gilbert Hurt, he's, by the way, mentioned in the readings, but I'll tell you his name, spelling is H-E-R-D-T. Gilbert Hurt, writing about the Zambia in New Guinea, says that the initiation rite to manhood consists of a young boy imbibing the semen of an older man directly. This is quite the bar mitzvah. It implies that, and in other cultures, that's when they engage in circumcision, ouch, at that age of 12 or 13. So the imitation rite of the teenager is that the teenager performs fellatio on an older man. And the idea is that by swallowing the semen, the strength and power of the older man, and of course of a particular older man, is transferred from that older man to the younger man. And if you think about it, if you can strip away the anxieties and indeed the criminality in our own culture of doing that, if you can strip that away, then it has a plausibility to it in how, quote, natives think. or indeed maybe how anybody would think is a plausible way of setting things up. So it transfers, and this is sort of another irony, the aggressiveness of masculinity. And the right guy for you is someone who is powerful, and it can transfer that way. Yes?
In those same cultures, would that mean that oral sex performed by women on men was not accepted?
The question was, does that mean, it's a great question, does that mean that in those cultures, oral sex by women on men would have been accepted? That's the question. And here's the true answer. I don't know. Okay? So we'd have to go back to Gilbert Hurt, and I don't even know if he took it up, because he was very interested in this particular homosexual action and what it implied. Something, of course, that feminists have pointed out is that one of the reasons why, maybe I mentioned it last time too, plausibly a reason why gay sex is so offensive in our culture, and especially to men, is that it betrays the male role, and it is the female role to be submissive, and performing fellatio is another act of submission that befits the female. And if a male does fellatio, then that is indeed a betrayal of gender power and gender capacity and of the male role. And by the way, this the inserter-insertee distinction is also in sometimes Western cultures also a basis of saying who is legitimate and what is okay and what is homosexual and what isn't. So, for example, we have a wonderful history of gay New York. And one of the things that went on in the Italian neighborhoods was that in back of the Italian bars and restaurants, of which we have some leftovers just south of here a little ways in Little Italy, they had back rooms where men would indeed have sex with each other. But these are not the gay bars that were to come to the same neighborhoods later. These are back rooms where heterosexual men would be inserters to men who were regarded as homosexual. And this is true, by the way, in the Middle East and in large swaths of Latin America. The inserter is not regarded as deviant. The inserter is just too much man, can't get enough at home, that kind of a problem. Whereas the insertee is indeed a deviant, a weak person, a sissy, a Nelly, a faggot. And that's the distinction that goes on. We know that something similar goes on in prisons, where given the situation, and wherever you have a situation on ship, in the military, and in prisons, where you create an all-male environment, and our prisons are overwhelmingly male, we have women's prisons as well, where some of the same phenomenon go on. But in the male prison, you don't have homosexuality, you instead have domination. And the inserter is indeed made stronger by the fact that he has a bitch or a series of bitches. And the person who is the insertee is the female role and is the weak role and is in a role where their capacity for exercising power and authority is through the protection of the male for whom they are the bitch. So you recapitulate, in a way, our kind of less pleasant images of heterosexuality within the prison, and what keeps the status system alive and the dignity of one group of men, at least, intact, is the fact that they are never the insertee. They are always the inserter. And in that way, they are not subject to the stigma of homosexuality, of weakness, of all of those other things that I've been talking about. So another setting, of course, which is all in the news, the priesthood. And sociologists sometimes use the word overdetermined. Sometimes we look for explanations of things. And we say, as I just said a minute ago, that if you segregate the genders, the sexualities, and you have all men, that causes some kind of homosexual activity to take place. I'm full of cause here in the class. If you were born into the working class, your chances of getting to Harvard, Yale, or Princeton are considerably lower than if you were born, say, into the Kennedy family. That's a kind of cause. Sometimes there's like a whole bunch of causes that all line up together, a kind of perfect storm of causation, such that you're going to get that kind of outcome. And what's going on in the Catholic Church, to the sociological eye, is an overdetermined outcome, which is, I think I've talked about this, you have a situation in which the priests are brought into the church as mechanisms through which you can escape, and I'll put it that way, you're supposed to forswear, that's the official doctrine, sexual relations with anybody and be celibate for the rest of your life. This, of course, means that a young boy who suspects himself even of having homosexual leanings has an outlet, a way of making a life. And it isn't just a way of making a life, it is a highly honored way of making a life. And so if your Italian mother, excuse my stereotyping, if your Italian mother is very anxious for her son to get married, and there is no other way to do it, then the way to escape the mother is, and not disappoint her, is to, again, enter the church, because that is an honored role in the family. In traditional Catholic life, that a child would become a priest brings honor and benefits to the family. Then, of course, you enter the situation where you have another group of boys coming along, and children, because it isn't just men on boys, it's also men on girls. But the preponderant scandals are men on boys. And then you bring in the situation where another generation of youngsters comes forward who are taught that the priest is something like omnipotent in terms of carrying the message of God and Jesus. And you are to confess everything you do, every thought you've had to this person to whom great honor is bestowed by everyone, including, and then you have the physicality of having the man and the boy alone together in a context of all the glories of the world, of incense, cathedrals, paintings, and stories of greatness and transcendence. All of this then sets up a predicament, and I'll call it a predicament, in which something like a homosexual act of a certain patterned way, it's in a way replicating ancient Greece between an older man and a younger boy, but in a context and in a culture which is not set up that way and does not find that acceptable at all. And so therefore, it is an avenue for guilt, for grief, for worry, and then for regarding it as indeed criminal from the standpoint of the priest, worry and anguish for at least some of the children who were involved, and I am told they carry it with them for a good part of their lives. I sometimes think we exaggerate the nature of that offense, but I think it's very plausible that it is sometimes indeed offending to the people who went through it. So we start getting to a situation of what we might call situational sexuality, and regard what people are doing sexually as very much due to the circumstances. The historic circumstances, were you born in ancient Greece, or were you born in the United States in the 21st century or the 20th century? Are you in an all-male environment? Are you in a female environment? Are you in a situation of dependence, of deference, and adulation of the other person, or some other set of varieties? And out of these things come the specificity of the sexual act. Again, what I'm contrasting all of this to is this notion that, at least for male sexuality, what we are dealing with is a kind of primal force that just comes out. Human nature. You can't stop it. That's why they do that. And what I'm trying to prepare for you with all of these examples in all of these ways, that whatever else it is, it's not that. It is conditioned and contexted by many, many things, including, by the way, the kind of food that you're eating. We're not going to talk about food very much. This is so overwhelming about sex. We could do a whole lecture on food. There's now a very serious food studies program, probably the leading food studies program in the United States, here at NYU, where they indeed take this food thing very seriously, including this drink thing. I had a friend and colleague years ago who wrote a book called Liquor License. And she meant by that, she's playing with those words, because in the United States, there is the belief, in Britain and in Japan, that if you drink a lot, then you don't know what you're doing. So that's when you engage in, people who engage in homosexuality, rape, murder, or whatever, it was the liquor talking. I wouldn't do that. As opposed to, for example, France and Italy, where if you get drunk, you're just drunk. You're responsible for everything you do. And they don't do what the British lads do. How many here have been to Britain? Raise your hand. Okay, about a third. So we'll tell the rest of the people, or about half of you, that what happens in Britain is, especially when the pubs close, is the young men come out of control. And they're peeing on the street, they're jumping on each other, they're singing stupid songs, waking everybody up, because they think that's what happens when you get drunk. Just like there's notions that many of you probably have of what happens when you have marijuana, that you laugh and have and want chocolate chip cookies and all that. That's just part of your folklore. And so you feel that you need it. I'm not questioning it. And I'm not questioning that lads, when they get drunk in England, but not in France, not in Italy, that when you've had enough to drink, you can't help yourself. And this pattern of activity happens, including a pattern of sexual activity. So anyway, you also, I'll remind you about Lord Humphreys and tea room trade, and that was still another way of having sex. Lord Humphrey is writing before gays were invented. Gayness is an invention. Just like these other roles, situations, bitches in prison is an invention. Greek love is an invention. These are all inventions. And gayness is also an invention. And so will be gay marriage. In a way, a variant of the Berdash theme, which was also an invention, built up over time. Romantic love. Remember what we started with early on in the class with the movie The King and I, in which Deborah Kerr instructs the king of Siam, a.k.a. Thailand, instructs him on how it is the world really works, which is from across the crowded room, a girl sees the shoes. She was a shoe person, as it turns out, and is struck by, this is the person, and forevermore, and we will love each other, and that's the way it's going to be forever and ever and ever. That is an invention, the invention of romantic love, which then we have, while at the same time people have sex with other people. Poor President Clinton with that young lady in the hallway, I think it was. Hallway sex, kind of like Lord Humphrey's, I think, in the restroom. A fleeting moment that probably is the reason why it's taken until this week to get health care in the United States. Vast consequences from the White House sex hallway through to millions and millions of people being treated and not being treated, living and dying. It's a life and death issue, really. Well, enough of this. Let's show you pictures. You've come to see dirty pictures, and I'm here to show them to you. So this is a temple in India, in the Chhatarpur district of India. That's about 300 miles away from New Delhi in northern India. And this is one of a series of temples. I know how many, but I've just forgotten. It's something. It's sort of like a campus of temples, and there's about 7 of them all together. I can't remember the number, but they're multiple temples. And let's just take a close-up look at what is going on these temple walls. And in a way, what I'm returning to is the way I began the lecture today, which was about fuck. You remember that? So here's a return to fuck. And the word fuck has been through this whole big deal process in the United States to reaching the point where finally I can say fuck in class because the vice president said it. Whereas in other cultures, in the Hindu world, on the temple, we're talking about the cathedral, St. John the Divine. I mean, we're talking that scale. This is the biggest and the best. We're talking about Notre Dame. We're talking about the Fifth Avenue Synagogue. This is as good as it gets. And all over these temple walls are situations of orgy. Let's continue talking about sex. This is from antiquity. I think it's Greek, but it might be Roman. I'm not sure. And look what those people did in the sense of art. Look what they made. And I'm using this again as evidence that they obviously had a different attitude than we do about sexuality and what can be talked about and what can be displayed and what can't be displayed. And one of the reasons why I like this so much is because of the beauty of it. That is, you see, our pornography is like low grade. They don't have, like Disney doesn't make it. It's not made with our great actresses and actors and our greatest cinematographers, although quite a number of them came out of pornography. But pornography is low budget. This is not low budget. Look at that fabric, as one of my grandfathers might have said. This was done by someone with great skill and was an expensive thing. And this one is even more amazing. You cannot buy this at IKEA. It's a table of men with erections. And again, you cannot buy this at IKEA. And I mean, not only for 2 reasons. One is that it's dirty. By the way, you know what does anybody know what Woody Allen said when he was asked if sex was dirty? Anybody know? Raise your hand if you know. What'd he say?
Sex is someone I
No.
love.
The answer was you've been captured by Deborah Carr and Yul Brynner. She said sex it's good with someone you love, something like that.
It's
Oh, masturbation is sex with someone you love. I think that's good. I don't think I knew that, but it completely fits the Woody Allen image. But does anybody know when he was asked, I think by a psychiatrist, if he thought sex was dirty? He said, only when it's good. So anyway, here we have, so there are two reasons why you won't find this at IKEA. And one of them is that we don't do sex in our furniture. And to have sex in a store like that would be the end of the store. I mean, we would have, can you imagine the scandal that would be? And the other reason is that IKEA doesn't sell anything this good. Look at the artistry and the craftsmanship of the work. And if you put those two things together, I take this as evidence that in this culture, in this society, they were putting tremendous effort into displaying, it's their porn. And it had a different status than porn has in our culture. And I don't even know if it's appropriate or fair. I'm just too ignorant to say whether it's, they would even call it porn or what. You know, the ancient, among the Greeks, the ceramics, the vases, you can go to the Metropolitan Museum and see them, are just covered with people having sex, and including what we call homosexuality, but in the way I described it in the Greek world. And they just put it out there. It's just part of being, part of life. Whereas for us, there is so much taboo and secrecy around what they didn't do. And here is, I used to know all about this. This is in Pompeii. And does anybody remember what this is? It has something to do with power and justice. And I mean, there's a larger story about this being connected to a scale and this penis being important in some way. As I'm just vaguely recalling, excuse this. The important point is that this is a mosaic on a wall, and again has a kind of institutionalized role. The first time I was there in Pompeii, the women were not allowed to see it and were held out. And so they couldn't go into this chamber where this was. But let's talk about now. Enough about the ancient world. So this is in Taiwan. It's in a public park. And it is an erect penis. And you want to have lunch, you're going to keep it company. Because that's what it's there for. And this is a great parade. And in contemporary Japan, do we have Japanese people in the room? Anybody here grow up or live in Japan? Well, okay, let's take a trip across across our oceans wide. This is a parade. This happens to be in the town of Komaki, Japan. These weigh hundreds of pounds in some cases. You're going to also see plastic ones. But here you see them being carried in the parade. And the parades are done as a celebration of the harvest. So they're annual. And in fact, it's about now. It's in March that this takes place. But it's already over, so don't be going. But it has, I think it's even March 15th. But that might be in my mind because of Income Tax Day, which is April 15th. But I think it's actually March 15th. And here you see some more of the local people having a great time. And it's being reported by a Western TV guy. Why not? And it can be individualized in a parade. Each person can have their own erect penis. See that? And of course, if you can imagine what's on their minds, it's not what would be on our minds. It's not what's on your minds, right? I know you have dirty minds, and that's the way you're thinking about this. There's a happy couple. And of course, there are souvenirs. So you can take home your own penis. And I don't know if they come in salt and pepper shakers, but why not? Just with the other knickknacks and tchotchkes, why not? And oh, okay. That's our free love conversation. Listen, I think you've probably gotten the message, which is that these things indeed vary. I want to talk about one of your readings. By the way, I've been told that in one case, maybe even two readings are lumped together on a single JPEG. So find one reading. When you find a reading for the course for this week, pursue it so that you get both readings. And I've also been told that one of those is in an advanced Word file, and not everybody's going to be able to open it on your computer. So we're going to, has anybody found that to be the case? They couldn't open it? Yeah. So we're going to put another version up in a different version of Word so that everybody will be able to get to it. But one of the readings in the class this term is by Judith Stacy, who is a professor here at NYU. And I think it's fair to say she is one of the leading scholars of sexuality in the country, and also has done a great deal of work on sexuality and gender, and has done also a good deal of scholarly work on China. In your reading, you're reading about the Muzhou people, who are now especially down to quite a small enclave in China, in a mountainous region. And here we again go back to the instruction of Deborah Kerr to the King of Siam about how it's got to be. But we could also take you to an enormous amount of political talk and scholarly literature that tells us that you can't really raise children appropriately without there being a mom and a dad. And especially unless you have a dad for the boys, then all kinds of hell will break loose, and it's all going to be weird, and they're going to have a social disease, and it's going to be trouble. And what Judy Stacy and other people who study these people, the Muzhou, point out is these people don't have marriage, they don't get hitched at all, and instead the way it works is that women are stable in their households that they were born in, and they die in those same households. Reproduction occurs and sexual pleasure because men come in the night, and it is always the night. It is not necessarily someone who is known to the family at all, but there is somehow, some way, a flirtation that got going somehow, somewhere during the day, and at night the man comes. The child, if there is a pregnancy, the baby is born into that home. There is no obligation of the person who provided the semen to have responsibilities. Instead, those responsibilities are borne by the mother's household, which includes her brothers, if there happen to be any brothers. There's a little bit of possibility that the family can adopt another young man if they don't have any young men, and there could be something like gender representation in the household. But the point is that what we regard as marriage, and the vast majority of people of the world regard as marriage, and not just marriage, but mating, simply is not there. And yet, Judy Stacy says, these are perfectly normal families in the sense that children are raised, they are productive, they seem reasonably happy as anybody else might be, and so it goes. Judy Stacy, in other of her work, is also trying to make a case, that's too strong, make a case for polygamy under the right case. That is one of our very strong beliefs, is that there should be one man and one woman, and no plurals. No two men, no two women. We don't even believe in one-night stands. Well, we don't even believe, through most of our doctrines, in sex outside of marriage, or at least when I was growing up, that was it. Again, very specific notions of who and how many should do what with whom. And it should be one-on-one. They should be married. I'll give you the extreme version. And that's the way it ought to be throughout life. Divorce was considered a scandal. That is, even serial monogamy was scandalous. So Judy Stacy says that polygamy is also a betrayal of that norm, that set of notions that I was talking about earlier, that I called the Deborah Carr love story. Polygamy is off limits, and it is a crime, and we have prosecuted and persecuted people for being polygamous. But in various parts of the world, polygamy is common. And Judy Stacy says that depending upon the situation, it may be the best outcome. And particularly for women, she is a feminist. And so if you're in a culture in which women have no rights, if you're in a culture in which there are not enough men to go around, then sharing a man with other women may work out. She's not advocating it. She's just saying it may work out, depending upon the time and depending upon the circumstance, including a circumstance practiced in some parts of the world where if your husband dies, then you become the wife of your husband's brother, joining his wife in being part of a concubine. And Judy Stacy says that sometimes, at least, this becomes not only an avenue of support at a dire moment, where otherwise you would be just cast aside because there is no way to live other than through a man, which maybe you say, well, that should be the wrong thing, but it is what indeed happened. And she then says that there is also a kind of sisterhood is possible. And our stereotype of the wives quarreling and fighting and being jealous of each other is not necessarily true. And Judy Stacy has interviewed polygamous families in South Africa, as well as some in the United States, and finds that this other way of doing things is at least potential and is present. As one woman told her when she was asked, how is it that to share him sexually and in other ways, and this woman said, I don't want to see him that much. I'm so glad she's here to take over and satisfy him, because I couldn't imagine being with him so much. And she meant sexually, and she meant otherwise as well. So it's a way of coming to terms with what might be a burden of course, we know about men now. They interrupt all the time. They don't put down the toilet seat. They're a whole lot of trouble. So sharing might be an okay idea. And that's the thrust of Stacy's work, and the reason why she puts a lot of effort into describing the Musou people of China is to just open our minds to the fact that it all depends on the complete arrangement. And if the complete arrangement is set up right, it changes the meaning of any particular part of that arrangement. It is all about the arrangement in terms of what happens, and for her also in terms of whether by her values it's okay or it's not okay. Well, we're going to leave the subject of sex because I just can't handle it anymore. And I want to talk about my other favorite subject in the world, which is the toilet, and how that works. So I promised you that we at least touch on these biological phenomenon and how they meet society. Body meets society. We talked a lot about sex. We're not going to talk much about eat. I'll talk maybe a little bit about it. But let's indeed talk about human elimination, or return to that subject. At the beginning of the class, I brought your attention to the fact that Norbert Elias was saying that we have made all kinds of changes in how we eat, and I've been pointing out the ways in which sex is done and considered appropriate, and how that all works out. In your readings, you're also reading, of course, Mitchell Denier's book. And Mitchell Denier pays attention to the body. And that's unusual for a sociologist writing an ethnography. You would think that it would, of course, be taken up, but it's not. And he acknowledges that when you got to go, you got to go. And in this case, the case of the men on the street, this meets up with all sorts of troubles in their lives and becomes a basis, indeed, of control over them. The fact that they have to eat, they have to eliminate, and they have to sleep. All of these things which are intrinsic to our body become in their lives very different from the way they are in our lives. And so we learn that they are turned down at McDonald's because they're not regarded as customers in the way I think it's fair to say all the people in this room are considered customers. One of my former students did a study of the Starbucks. The majority of people who go into Starbucks do not buy anything. They go into Starbucks to use the bathrooms, or at least those were the 3 Starbucks that he studied. These people cannot go into Starbucks and simply go to the bathroom as a result of their life situation. And so he describes how they do it, which is to use the paper cup, do it between cars. And it's also because the police will remove their stuff if they go to the bathroom and leave their stuff alone. Or if they go to eat, or if they go for any reason away, their stuff will be taken away. So we have the body meeting a structure of authority, a structure of punitive actions, as well as, coming from Norbert Elias, notions of what is proper for a human being to do when they pee. We know it's not the urine per se, because every block you walk on, there's a dog peeing. They don't have like better urine than we have. It's something else. It's not the stuff. And of course, the dogs are peeing all over the place on trees and killing our trees because it's too acidic and it's just too much of that stuff. So it's not the urine, is it? It's got to be something else. And it has to do with the human being being animalistic and betraying all of us by not revealing the civilizing process that we're supposed to have, at least in New York and at least at this moment. We also can't sleep in exactly how we want. That's also very regulated. So in our culture, our babies, our children sleep alone. And it is regarded as an important improvement in their upbringing to separate them from us. And some people now keep their children in bed with them longer, but mostly we get rid of them and they sleep alone. And they are often the only people who sleep alone in the household, and we wonder why they have nightmares. It's an odd situation, and in many cultures of the world, the babies, so-called lesser cultures of the world, children, the whole family sleeps together, but we're not supposed to do that. We sleep separately from our children, who themselves don't sleep together. And of course, it's also very important that we keep boys separate from girls, even in separate rooms, even prepubescent, because that's an invitation to trouble, because of, again, we know these massive eruptions that might occur across the gender line. Now we have these men. They've got to sleep somewhere, just like everybody's got to sleep. But if they sleep in X place or Y place, they will be told to go away. And so the city is a constant jockeying of moving them from one place to another, physically where they're going to stand and make their living, how they're going to pee, and of course defecate, and also then where they actually are going to sleep. So again, I'm trying to get this idea across that it's body meets society, and out of that comes this whole set of rituals and activities and punishments and possibilities and invitations that most of us are separated from. There's a specificity to it, and this specificity then carries into social class, race, and gender in a way that that Denier indicates. And I want you to read it with all these things I've been talking about in mind, about body meeting society. So let's just do a roundup then of how we do it. First of all, getting back to just let's use the gender example to skip for the moment social class. How do we eat? Well, we mix. We have men and women, boys and girls, and that's okay. That's the way we eat. Other people don't. So in many parts of the Islamic world, for example, men eat separately from women. It also varies within our own culture about social class. Do adults eat with children, or do children eat separately from adults? There's an openness to that in our own society. In Japan, people don't eat on the street. That is a major faux pas. And the fact that Americans walk around with cheeseburgers in their hands on the street is an astonishingly uncivilized, filthy thing to be doing. But we do it, and we do it with each other across gender and across age. Sex. How do we do sex, and how are we supposed to do sex? We're to do it one man and one woman, not two women and one man, or two men and one woman, and not two men and not two women. We mix when we have sex, which is how we're able to perpetuate ourselves. It takes two to tango, but only two, and they should be of the opposite sex. And then we come to the final example, is how do we shit and pee? And in the same way that, of course, in our culture we eat together, we don't pee and shit together. And that binary is fundamental. So, and here's my last line. Societies are a mix of how it's all done. That is, if you go across these things of how the body works and how it's supposed to be done and not to be done, all of that varies by history and place to place and society and to society. It is a relationship of agencies and structures, of material practices and immaterial practices. And a way of talking about that is to say that's what culture is this intermix of the human body, its proclivities, the equipment that are provided, and the rules and regulations, formal and informal, about how it's supposed to work. Okay, we're all washed up for today. I didn't talk about washing.